And the clinking of silverware on porcelain is a specific kind of sound. It's a sound of civility, of polite society. But when it's punctuated by a forced and theatrical laugh that's too sharp, too loud, it becomes a weapon. My sister Amelia was a master of weaponized laughter. It was a sound designed to draw attention and to frame a punchline. And tonight, I was the punchline. Honestly, can you even imagine? She said, her voice dripping with the fox pity she had perfected over a lifetime. And she gestured towards me with a languid wave of her hand, a diamond the size of a pigeon's egg on her finger, catching the light from the restaurant's chandelier. My sister, and the bookworm, spends all day cooped up in a dusty office reading the driest, most boring papers imaginable, while we're out here, and living life. I didn't look up from my water glass. I was focused on the condensation, tracing a path down the crystal, and I was mentally reviewing the preliminary injunction brief for the Paytel v. Global Petro case, a complex web of international trade law and environmental regulations. And it was a delicate ecosystem of precedent and statute, one that I had spent the last 2 weeks untangling in my chambers. It was anything but boring. The man beside her, her new fiancé, and chuckled. His name was Marcus Thorne. He was handsome in the way that stock photo models are handsome. Perfect teeth, a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes that held the vacant and confident sheen of a man who had never been told no. He wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. And she's a lawyer, I heard my mother say, a gentle correction from across the vast, linen-draped table. And my parents had organized this dinner at Area, a place where the waiters spoke in hushed tones and the menu didn't have prices. It was to celebrate the engagement, and it felt more like a coronation. Amelia scoffed, a little puff of air. A lawyer, a paralegal, a secretary, what's the difference, really? It's all just paperwork, right? And sis. She leaned forward, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper that was intended for the entire table of 12 to hear. Tell me, and do you even own anything that isn't gray or navy blue? You must be so lonely. Don't you want a life like this? A man like Marcus. That was the moment. The public humiliation. And she wasn't just mocking my career, she was painting my entire life as a failure, a gray, loveless existence to serve as the dull backdrop for her own brilliant, sparkling life. And the table fell silent. Her friends, a collection of women with identical hairstyles and expressions of bored superiority, watched me waiting for a reaction, for me to crumble. But then, a strange thing happened. Marcus Thorne, the prize pony fiancé, stopped smiling. The blood drained from his face, leaving his tanned skin a sickly, pale yellow. His eyes, and which had been dismissively glossing over me, were now wide, fixed on my face with an expression of dawning, gut-wrenching horror. His hand, which was resting on Amelia's back, and twitched. He leaned slightly away from her, a barely perceptible motion, but I saw it. I see everything, it's my job. He knew who I was. And it clearly wasn't the bookworm's sister, Amelia, oblivious, ploughed on. Seriously, what's the point of all that work? You should just quit. We could find you a nice and simple job. Maybe event planning. You could have helped with the wedding. But I guess we don't really need your kind of energy around. All that seriousness is such a downer. And consider yourself dismissed from bridesmaid duties. In fact, you're dismissed from the whole wedding. We just want good vibes, you know. She was firing me, from my own family, and in front of her sycophantic friends and our long-suffering parents. It was a declaration of social exile, delivered with a smug, triumphant smile. And if you've ever wondered what it feels like to watch a person unknowingly detonate a bomb under their own life while thinking they're lighting a firework, and do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Because what followed was a masterclass in consequence, and the tuition was a life she thought she had secured. And Marcus's voice was a strangled whisper, so quiet I almost didn't hear it over the ringing in my ears. Amelia stopped talking. But she didn't hear him, and she was too busy basking in her moment. And who even needs a judge of dusty old books when you have a king like? You're your Judge Morrison. Marcus finally choked out, his words tumbling over each other. And he wasn't looking at Amelia, he was staring at me, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. Judge Eleanor Morrison. And from the 9th Circuit. The silence at the table was no longer awkward, it was absolute, it was the kind of silence that precedes a verdict. Amelia's smile faltered, and she looked from her fiancé's horrified face to my completely neutral one. What, Judge, what are you talking about? She's my sister Ellie. And she shuffles papers for a living. I finally lifted my gaze from my water glass. I met Marcus Thorne's terrified eyes. I didn't smile. I didn't have to. I simply gave a slow and deliberate nod. I saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. I stood up. I placed my linen napkin neatly on the table beside my untouched plate of sea bass. I didn't argue. And I didn't explain that I wasn't a paralegal, but a federal judge, one of the youngest ever appointed to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And I didn't mention that the dusty papers I read were the very fabric of law and order that allowed men like him to build their empires. I simply accepted her terms. "You're right, Amelia," I said, my voice calm and even. "You should only have good vibes at your wedding." I picked up my clutch from the empty chair beside me, and, "Thank you for the dinner, Mom, Dad," I walked away from the table. I could feel every eye in the restaurant on me. I didn't rush. I walked through the hushed dining room, and my heels clicking softly on the marble floor. As I reached the ornate lobby, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had seen the future in Marcus Thorne's eyes, and he hadn't just gotten engaged to the sister of a judge. He had just publicly mocked the very judge who held his entire future in her hands. He had terminated his own shot at salvation, and he just didn't know the specifics yet. My chambers are on the 27th floor of the federal courthouse. There are no chandeliers. The view isn't of a glittering city, but of the stark and concrete lines of the buildings that house the law firms that feed the beast. The air smells of old paper, leather-bound books, and the faint, clean scent of ozone from the servers. It is quiet, cool, and orderly. It is the brain of the justice system, and it is my sanctuary. I didn't go there that night. I went home to my quiet apartment, poured a glass of wine, and then sat in my home office. Anger is an inefficient emotion. It's messy. It clouds judgment. What I felt wasn't anger. It was a profound sense of clarity, the kind of clarity that comes when a complex set of facts suddenly snaps into a coherent picture. Marcus Thorne. The name echoed in my mind. It was familiar, but not from Amelia's gushing stories. I had seen it somewhere before, recently. I sat down at my desk, a large oak slab covered in neat piles of legal journals and briefs, and woke up my workstation. My access level to the federal court's electronic filing system is absolute. It is the digital equivalent of a master key to every secret, every dispute, and every piece of litigation in the district. As a professional, I was bound to respect Amelia's wishes. She had dismissed me. She had made it clear our relationship was, in her eyes, and null and void. A judge must recuse themselves from a case if there is a personal conflict of interest, if their impartiality might reasonably be questioned. Amelia had just, and with her own words, publicly and unequivocally severed the tie that could have created that conflict. She had given me a gift, the gift of absolute, unimpeachable impartiality, and I typed his name into the search bar, Marcus Thorne. The result appeared instantly, not one case but a web of them, a sprawling complex multi-district litigation, and the lead case was Thorne Development Group LLC v. the City of Northwood et al. But that wasn't the one that made me pause. Tucked underneath it was a civil fraud case, brought by a class of investors Albright et al. V. Thorne Marcus et al. And the plaintiffs alleged that Marcus Thorne and his partners had engaged in a massive scheme to defraud investors in a series of luxury resort developments, and using shell corporations and falsified environmental reports to secure funding. My blood ran cold. The case was assigned to the 9th Circuit. My circuit! I clicked on the case file, and my name was not on the 3-judge panel assigned to the main appeal. A flicker of disappointment, which I quickly suppressed, but then I kept scrolling down through the docket, and through the endless list of motions and responses. And there it was, a pending motion to unseal confidential financial records and discovery documents, a critical, and potentially case-ending motion that had been argued last month. The decision was pending, and the name of the presiding judge for the specific, dispositive motion was listed in stark and black letters: the Honorable Eleanor R. Morrison. I leaned back in my chair. The wine in my glass remained untouched. The universe doesn't hand out justice memos, but sometimes, and it delivers the case file directly to your inbox. Amelia didn't want a bookworm at her wedding, and Marcus Thorne was about to find out what happens when that bookworm is the author of the next chapter of his life. The revenge, if you could call it that, began not with a bang, but with the quiet, methodical application of the law. I wasn't sabotaging him. I was simply doing my job. Step 1, the recusal analysis. And the first thing I did the next morning in my chambers was write a detailed, 5-page memorandum from my own private file. It outlined the events of the engagement dinner. It quoted Amelia's declaration, my dismissal. It analyzed the legal standard for judicial recusal under 28 U.S.C. 2455. The standard is whether a reasonable person, and knowing all the circumstances, would harbor doubts about the judge's impartiality. Amelia had just provided a stadium full of witnesses that no reasonable person could consider us to be on close, familial terms. I concluded the memo, and the familial relationship has been publicly repudiated by the party in question, thus eliminating any potential appearance of bias. Recusal is not warranted. I signed and dated it, and this was my shield. Step 2, the reading. I had already read the briefs for the motion to unseal. They were dense and filled with arguments about trade secrets and proprietary financial data, Thorne's lawyers argued that unsealing the records would cause irreparable harm to his business. And the plaintiffs argued that the records were the only way to prove a pattern of intentional fraud. I now read every single word, every citation, every footnote. But this time, and I wasn't just reading it as a legal problem, I was reading it with the image of Marcus Thorne's pale, terrified face burned into my memory. And that terror was not the fear of a man with nothing to hide. Step 3: the ruling. This was the big one. The power of a judge isn't just in the final verdict, and it's in the hundreds of small, procedural decisions that shape the battlefield. Denying a motion, admitting a piece of evidence, unsealing a document, and Thorne's entire defense rested on keeping his network of shell corporations and offshore accounts hidden in the dark. I was about to turn on the floodlights, and I spent the entire day drafting the opinion. I addressed each of Thorne's arguments meticulously. The need for transparency, the public interest in cases of alleged widespread fraud, and the specific and credible allegations made by the plaintiffs, it all weighed heavily in favor of disclosure, and his claims of irreparable harm were speculative compared to the plaintiff's right to discovery. I wasn't breaking the law. I wasn't even bending it. I was enforcing it with the full and dispassionate weight of my office. On Friday afternoon, I finalized the 27-page opinion. It was a scholarly, ironclad legal argument. It concluded with a single, devastating sentence. And for the foregoing reasons, the plaintiff's motion to unseal is hereby guaranteed. I pressed execute on my terminal. The order was electronically filed, and in law firms all across the city, email alerts pinged. The quiet hum of the legal world was just shattered, and up on the 54th floor of the Thorne Tower, and I imagined the air was suddenly very, very thin. The chaos started as a tremor, not an earthquake. I wasn't there to see it, but I didn't need to be. I knew the script. I had written the stage directions. Late Friday, I received an automated notification, a new filing in Albright v. Thorne. It was an emergency motion for reconsideration and stay of the court's order. It was 50 pages of barely restrained panic, and arguing that my ruling was an abuse of discretion and would effectively bankrupt the company before the case even went to trial. It was the legal equivalent of a shriek, and I denied the stay the same day. The order to unseal would proceed. Then my personal phone started ringing. It was my mother. "Ellie, honey, what is going on?" Her voice was tight with anxiety. "Amelia is beside herself. She called me in hysterics. Something about you ruining Marcus's business. And she said you're targeting him." "I'm not targeting anyone, Mom," I said calmly, looking out my office window at the setting sun. "I'm a judge, and a case involving his business came before me. I made a ruling based on the law." "But he's your sister's fiancé!" "Can't you just, I don't know, help him?" Amelia was very clear about our relationship, Mom. She dismissed me. That has consequences. And helping one side in a legal dispute is not something a judge does. I said it gently but firmly. This was a boundary I had to enforce. "And she says the wedding is off if he loses his money," she whispered, and I could hear the heartbreak in her voice. "That sounds like a problem for Amelia and Marcus to discuss," I replied. The weekend was a barrage of frantic voicemails from my sister, and they started angries. "How could you do this to me? You're jealous! You've always been jealous!" Then devolved into tearful beggings. "Ellie, please, he didn't mean it. And I didn't mean it. Just reverse it." And finally ended in sullen silence. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. And I simply archived the voicemails into a folder on my computer evidence. On Monday morning, the real panic began. The unsealed documents were a treasure trove for the plaintiffs. A labyrinth of offshore accounts, transfers between shell companies, and emails that explicitly discussed burying the environmental reports and managing investor expectations. It was a roadmap to the fraud. The lead counsel for the plaintiffs, and a bulldog of a lawyer named Maria Sanchez, filed a new motion, an ex parte application for a temporary restraining order to freeze corporate and personal assets of Marcus Thorne. And she argued he was now a significant flight risk and was likely to start moving assets offshore to avoid judgment. The application landed on my desk, and freezing a person's assets is one of the most drastic measures a court can take. It's a legal nuclear option, but Sanchez's application was flawless, and it pointed directly to the newly unsealed evidence. The risk was no longer speculative, it was clear and present. While I was reviewing the application, and a call came through from the clerk of the court. "Your Honor," he said, his voice hushed. "We have a situation. A Mr. Marcus Thorne is in the courthouse lobby. He is demanding to see you. He doesn't have an appointment." "Thank you, David. He is not to be permitted past security," I said calmly, "and inform him that any and all communication must go through his legal counsel via official court filings." He's with your sister, Your Honor." Of course he was. And he was using her as a human shield, his last-ditch attempt at an appeal. "The instruction stands, David." I hung up. I took a deep breath. I signed the temporary restraining order. I pressed execute. At that moment, across the country, digital locks slammed shut. Marcus Thorne's corporate accounts, and his personal bank accounts, his trading portfolios, frozen. His credit cards would be declined. He was, for all intents and purposes, broke. And he was standing in the lobby of the building where I worked, and he likely couldn't even afford to pay for the parking garage. And while Marcus Thorne was being politely but firmly escorted out of the courthouse, I was executing my masterstroke. It wasn't a business deal, and it was a move that solidified my position and demonstrated the true reach of my authority. The Chief Judge of the Ninth Circuit, Julian Croft, was a man I deeply respected, and he was a legal giant, a scholar of the highest order, and my mentor. The frantic motions filed by Thorne's legal team had not gone unnoticed, and they had filed a motion to have me recused, which I had denied. They had then filed an appeal of my denial to the Chief Judge himself. It was a desperate Hail Mary pass, and I requested a meeting with Judge Croft. I didn't have to. I could have let the legal process play out, but I wanted to control the narrative. I walked into his vast, sunlit chambers, and a stark contrast to my own functional space. "Eleanor," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "This Albright v. Thorne case is causing quite a stir, and his lawyers are throwing everything at the wall." "They are, sir," I said, sitting opposite him. "Which is why I'm here, and I wanted to address the recusal motion with you personally." I didn't make excuses. I didn't mention the insults or the humiliation. I simply laid out the facts. "My sister recently became engaged to the defendant, Marcus Thorne," I began. "At a family gathering in front of numerous witnesses, my sister publicly expressed that she no longer considers me part of her life and dismissed me from the family. Her fiancé, the defendant, and was present and later confronted me with the knowledge of my profession, which he had not previously seemed to possess. I handed him the memorandum I had written for my file, and he read it in silence, his expression unreadable. I concluded, sir, that any reasonable observer would agree that the familial tie has been effectively severed by their own actions, and therefore no conflict of interest exists that would warrant my recusal. In fact, recusing myself now after the public confrontation, and might give the appearance that I was intimidated or influenced by their out-of-court behavior. This was the masterstroke. I wasn't defending myself, and I was framing my continued presence on the case as a defense of the integrity of the court itself. To back down now would be to admit that a judge could be bullied off a case, and Judge Croft finished the memo and looked at me over the top of his reading glasses. He was silent for a full minute. "Your sister sounds like a piece of work," he said finally. "She has her moments," I replied with a slight smile. "Your legal analysis is sound, Eleanor. Watertight as usual." He tapped the memo, "and the motion to have you recused is denied. And I'm going to take it a step further. Given the complexity of the underlying fraud allegations and the aggressive and borderline frivolous tactics being employed by the defense, I am exercising my authority to reassign the main appeal." He swiveled in his chair and typed something on his computer. "And the original 3-judge panel is being dissolved. I'm assigning a new panel. I will sit on it myself, and so will you." I blinked. He wasn't just backing my play, and he was promoting me. He was putting me on the main event, the appeal that would decide the entire case. Thorne's lawyers had tried to get me thrown out of the game. Instead, and the chief judge had just made me the referee. "This case requires judges who will not be swayed by theatrics," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "And you, Eleanor, and have just proven that you are unflappable. Now let's go see what justice looks like for Mr. and Thorne." I walked out of his office with a signed order not just keeping me on the case, but giving me a central role in its final outcome. And I had taken their attack and forged it into a shield, and then a weapon. Marcus Thorne had tried to get rid of the judge on the preliminary motion. He now faced that same judge, and backed by the chief judge of the circuit for the final verdict. The final confrontation didn't happen in a courtroom or a boardroom. It happened on a Tuesday night under the dim and buzzing fluorescent lights of the parking garage beneath my apartment building. I had worked late, reviewing the mountain of newly unsealed evidence. It was worse than I had imagined, and a clear decade-long pattern of deception. As I got out of my car, they stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. Amelia and Marcus, they looked like ghosts. Amelia's designer dress was wrinkled, her perfect makeup was smeared from crying, and her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. Marcus was a shadow of the man from the restaurant, and his expensive suit hung on him, and he looked like he hadn't slept in a week. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate fear. "Ellie," Amelia whispered, and her voice cracking. She took a step forward. "Please." I stopped, my keys in my hand. I didn't move towards them. I just stood there, a neutral observer. "We're ruined," she said, tears streaming down her face. "They froze everything. We can't even pay our rent. The wedding, everything is gone. Because of you. No. Amelia, I said, my voice quiet but firm in the echoing silence of the garage. Not because of me. Because of him. I nodded towards Marcus, because he built an empire on lies, and the bill came due. But you're my sister! She cried, the old argument, the only one she had left. And, you're supposed to protect me? Did you feel like my sister when you mocked me in front of your friends? I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. And, did you feel like my sister when you called my life's work boring and meaningless and told me I was dismissed? You can't have it both ways, Amelia. And you can't cast me out and then run to me for shelter when the storm hits. That's not how it works. Marcus finally spoke, his voice raspy. And, judge your honor, I made a mistake. I was an idiot. I didn't know who you were. That's the point, Mr. Thorne, I said, turning my gaze to him. And, it shouldn't matter who I am. You shouldn't defraud people. You shouldn't build a business on deceit. And the law applies to you whether the judge is a stranger or the sister your fiancé just publicly humiliated. My identity is irrelevant. I'll do anything, he pleaded, and taking a step forward. I'll pay them back, we can settle. Just unfreeze the accounts, talk to the chief judge. And you can fix this. I looked at this broken man and the woman beside him, and for the first time I felt a flicker of something, not pity, not satisfaction, just a profound and wary sadness. They still didn't get it. They thought this was personal. They thought it was a switch I could flip. You think I'm a kingmaker, Mr. Thorne, and someone who can grant favors and make problems disappear. That's not what a judge is. I am an arbiter of the law. The law you broke, the evidence is overwhelming, and your assets were frozen to prevent you from hiding them, which according to the documents I read today, you have a long and established history of doing. There is nothing to fix. This is the system working as intended. I turned my back on them and walked towards the elevator. Ellie, and don't walk away from me. Amelia shrieked, her voice echoing in the concrete space. I stopped at the elevator door and turned back one last time. You dismissed me. And Amelia, I said softly. I'm just respecting your wishes. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside and didn't look back as they slid shut, leaving them alone in the dark. The move out was metaphorical but no less painful. The appeal was a bloodbath, with the financial records unsealed and the chief judge on the panel, and Thorne's legal team had nowhere to run. The arguments they presented were weak, desperate attempts to suppress the mountain of evidence against him. And we affirmed the lower court's decision and went further, finding him liable for punitive damages that doubled the judgment against him. And Marcus Thorne was utterly and completely ruined. He declared bankruptcy. His engagement to my sister was, of course, called off, and I heard through my parents that he fled the country to a non-extradition territory, a king in exile with no kingdom. Amelia's fall was less dramatic but just as complete, and her condo was sold. The fancy car was repossessed. Her fair weather friends vanished the moment the money did. She had to move back in with my parents, the last I heard, and she was working as a receptionist at a dental office. I hope she was learning humility. I hope she was learning to be kind. My life continued. The legal world is small, and the story of the upstart billionaire who mocked the wrong judge became something of a quiet legend in the courthouse hallways. My reputation was solidified, and I was seen as what every judge strives to be: impartial, incorruptible, and unflappable. 6 months later, I was in my chambers signing the final order in a complex patent dispute. There was a soft knock on my door. It was Judge Croft. Eleanor, he said with a warm smile, just wanted to let you know the Supreme Court denied cert on the Thorne case. It's officially over. You did good work on that one. It was a messy case, but you handled it with integrity. Thank you, Julian, I said, and a genuine warmth spreading through me. It wasn't a bonus or a stock option, it was respect, the only currency that truly matters. He looked around my sparse, functional office. And, there's a corner chamber opening up on the 30th floor. A much better view. It's yours if you want it. I smiled. I'm fine right here, Julian. And the view from here is perfectly clear. He nodded, understanding. He knew I didn't need a view of the city. I was content in the engine room, the place where the real power resided. And I filed away the Thorne case file. The building hummed around me. It was the sound of the system working, of justice being served, of balance being restored. My dignity was intact, and my purpose was clear. And somewhere in a dentist's office, my sister was probably scheduling an appointment, learning that some things like respect have to be earned. And some people think power is loud, that it lives in penthouses and screams from headlines. But real power is quiet. It's the steady, unwavering force of integrity, and its verdict. And when it finally comes is always final. Thanks for listening. The court is adjourned.